Joining me now from Orange County, California is Hugh Hewitt. He is host of the popular conservative radio program, The Hugh Hewitt Show. Also joining us from Washington, D.C., Dan Balz. He is the chief correspondent at the Washington Post. I am pleased to have both of them at this time. Hugh, tell me, I'm fascinated by the idea how Trump continues to get in the way of his message. Is that in his DNA?
He does, Charlie, and it's a inability to stay focused that has hurt him a lot in this month where he could have been repurposing and repositioning the message. And I think today Youngstown State will obviously have to read what the reaction is tomorrow. I hope he doesn't step on his message again like he did last week, gave a great speech in Detroit, made some offhanded comments about the Second Amendment, stepped on his message of economic renewal and massive tax cuts and rewrites, and that was totally lost for the entire week. Today at the home of Dyke Beatty, the man who invented the penalty flag. It's in my backyard up in Trumbull-Mahoning County in the Steel Valley of Ohio. He'll try again to reset, and if he stays on message, he can be very successful in this area because for reasons we can talk about at length, Secretary Clinton doesn't have a great record when it comes to stopping ISIS, but he's sure she's the focus and not some sidebar that he ignites at the same time.
Is it too late to do that, Dan?
It's getting very late, Charlie. There's no question about it. I mean, the hole he has dug for himself is very wide and very deep at this point. I mean, the national polls, the Real Clear Politics average over the weekend was 6 points plus. That's not at all a close election. The battleground states look very bad for him at this point. The Electoral College forecasts look very bad for him at this point. One would say, you know, you never say never in a campaign, but he really is running out of time, and I mean, the problem is, you know, politics is the game of addition, not subtraction, and in all sorts of ways, he is blocking access to his candidacy to people and groups that he really needs to go after, and it's because of what Hugh said. He creates these diversions from his real message, and carries out these fights, grievances that he continues to try to litigate long after he needs to worry about them. So there's just a lot he needs to do. He can't be somebody other than who he is, but he's got to find a way to both be who he is and to stay on a message that's consistent and focused on Hillary Clinton.
Do you believe that's a winning message, Dan?
I think it's a possibly winning message. I mean, Charlie, we're in an environment, we've talked about this before, we're in an environment where people are looking for change. They're not happy with the status quo. They're not happy with Washington. They're not happy with the way the political system works. They think something dramatic needs to be done to kind of shake it up. And Donald Trump, in many ways, is the candidate who is best positioned to do that. Hillary Clinton is an establishment candidate. She will carry on a continuation of policies that we've had for the last 8 years. Many people like those, many people don't. But he cannot become the candidate for change when he's talking about everything other than that.
That's exactly what you believe, isn't it, Hugh?
Yes, it is. In fact, I was thinking when Dan was talking, he did a piece for the Washington Post yesterday on Sunday that summarized the crisis that currently exists within the Trump campaign. And it's all unforced error. I believe that Donald Trump could be 10 points ahead right now had he begun to execute in May a purposeful, message-driven, especially targeted at the underclass in America, the working class in America, the lower class in America, who feel left behind. I've always said he's the tractor beam for people who are despairing in this country. And there is a currently very hot book out there. You may have already talked to J.D. Vance about Hillbilly Elegy.
Right, Charlie, we know about it. Yes.
Yeah, and so it's about the working class in America and the deep dysfunction and almost sense of hopelessness that has absorbed large communities in states that Donald Trump needs to carry: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. And I believe that, Dan just alluded to this, it's possible still to energize and encourage that group of people and say to the coal miners that Mrs. Clinton wants to put out of work, I don't want to put you out of work, I want to put you back to work. And to say to the automobile manufacturing plants which are empty in Michigan, or the steel plants that are closed in Ohio, we can repurpose those plants and bring back jobs. But it is very late in the day. It ain't over because it's not September. And the debates still matter quite a lot. But, boy, it's late. As Dan wrote yesterday, it's very late.
But is this Donald Trump's message, or simply a message that he converged with in this campaign season? Does he feel the discontent? Does he understand the discontent that those people that you have been speaking about in the last 2 minutes?
I think he appropriated it, and I think his 11 years in television, reality television, brings him into touch with a lot of people who are eager to succeed in finding barriers in their way, and he is much a populist kind of figure in the way famous populists have been before. They're not living a populist lifestyle. They're not of the people, but they're very much in touch with the people. I'd also point out, and interesting if Dan has noticed this, Marco Rubio is far ahead in Florida. Rob Portman is far ahead in Ohio. Pat Toomey's neck and neck in Pennsylvania. The Republicans aren't getting blown out. There are organization structures in these states that Trump can harness to his advantage if he chooses to do so, if he makes some appointments and makes some gestures that way. But it's up to him.
Dan, do you agree?
I do up to a point. I mean, I think Pugh's right. If you look at some of these Senate races, the Republicans are not getting blown out at a time when Donald Trump is performing weakly in those states. I think that to Hugh's point, there is a disaffected, dissatisfied electorate out there. But I think that Trump's problem is whether there are enough of those white blue-collar workers to actually win the election. My hunch is that there are not, that he has to go beyond that. I mean, and if you look at the polling, there is the most important thing, and our friend Ron Brownstein has written smartly about this all year, there is a gap that has opened up between those with college degrees and those without college degrees. And in the white community, Donald Trump does extremely well with those who do not have college degrees, but he is losing in many places, if not most places, among whites with college degrees. That's a departure from the way Republican candidates have performed in the past. He doesn't have to win them overwhelmingly, but he has to do better than he is doing. He has to do better with women than he's doing. He can't get blown out in some of these areas in the way he's getting blown out now and still hope that there is enough of a reservoir of the kind of the disaffected white working class that can put him over the top.
Hugh?
Well, in 1968, there was such volatility that no one really knew what was until the end. And I believe that we're in that era of volatility again. In fact, Milwaukee could easily have gotten a lot worse than it did get better over the weekend, and hopefully it will remain calm. But as California is entering fire season, so America is entering its political fire season. And these debates and the events in the saddle in the Middle East, in Crimea, where there are troops massing on both sides of the new border, the Russian-imposed border, in Syria, where the genocide goes on, and indeed across the United States and urban America, lots of stuff can happen. And that's why I'm reluctant to say, even if mid-September rolls around and Donald Trump is down by a Real Clear Politics average of 10 points. I just don't know in this year of black swans whether or not there isn't another one going to descend in the stretch run.
And there's also the risk that something might come out, I guess, Dan, also about Hillary Clinton because of the release of these emails, the director's interview of the FBI interview of Hillary, you know, what emails might be coming out. That great question mark hangs over her, doesn't it?
It certainly does, Charlie, and she's not been able to put that to rest through the course of this entire campaign, and in fact, you know, has recently made it worse or brought it back to the forefront with her interpretation of what FBI Director Comey said as opposed to what most people think and Comey said. So those revelations may and well continue to haunt her all the way to Election Day. The question, I guess, is, are they clear-cut enough to really change perceptions, or are they in the area of kind of murkiness so that people who have already kind of made up their minds stick with which side of the ledger they feel those talk about? So, but that's a problem. But, you know, we go back to Donald Trump constantly. The issue is, in one way or another, he's unable to keep the focus on Hillary Clinton. He does the opposite. He draws attention away from her weaknesses and her vulnerabilities and brings it back on himself so that when things happen to her, they become less of a story than they might if he were able to run a more consistent campaign.
Well, you had an interview with Donald Trump, and you said to him, as I remember, you said something like, well, clearly I understand what you meant. You meant when you talked about Obama being a co-founder of ISIS, you meant, the deal that he made to leave, for American troops to leave Iraq, and that had led to the resurgence because of how the Shia government treated Sunnis and all of that, and Al-Qaeda came back. I mean, that's exactly what you thought he meant. But he didn't mean that, he said.
I was sincere because I believe that the president lost the peace in 2011 by the precipitous withdrawal of American troops from Iraq and the failure to negotiate, Secretary Clinton's failure to negotiate, an extension of the status of forces agreement, which was the avowed reason why we couldn't stay, as we didn't have a status of forces agreement. We still don't have one. We've got troops there today, so it never made any sense. But we left. And into that vacuum in Anbar province spilled the Syrian civil war and al-Baghdadi's troops flying the black flags that Zarqawi had invented. So I thought he was ready to give us an argument. No, he said no. And in fact, as Dan just alluded to, in that same interview, we talked about Gilbert Shiguri, who's a Nigerian Lebanese billionaire whose money has a distinct odor around it, coming from the period of the Nigerian dictatorship, and who's had to pay $300 million to the Nigerian government to avoid criminal charges in the past. And there is an email from Doug Bann at the Clinton Foundation to Huma Abedin at the State Department 3 months into Mrs. Clinton's tenure. Hey, help us out. We need some help for Shiguri, who's given some money here. And she writes back, oh, this is the ambassador. Now, the Clinton people have done their traditional...
Was it the ambassador or a former ambassador?
I think it was the current ambassador that Huma Abedin offered to intervene with, but the former ambassador now has stepped forward and said, I never got the call, I didn't do anything. So they've done some repair. Nevertheless, what Donald Trump ought to have done all last week is not yell at the New York Times or the Washington Post, but speak the name Gilbert Shiguri again and again and again, and bait the trap for the media not to investigate himself or his press approach, which I've argued with him is counterproductive and not in the American tradition, but instead he put the attention back on himself, not on Mrs. Clinton. It's just a mistake. It's 101, campaign 101, not executed well.
So one more time, as we've all asked 1,000 times, why does he do it?
If you are the star of it, I'm beginning to think what was his greatest strength in the primary, the masterful use of television to make yourself the center of attention in every show, the 12 debates that we did, of which I was a part of 4 of them. That same ability to make yourself the center of attention is it's not something he can turn off. It is a permanent on switch. And that's what makes for great TV. It's what makes for wonderful primary runs. It doesn't make for a great general election campaign.
You said, Dan, that Trump had to expand rather than subtract in the column that Hugh referred to and that I read from earlier. I mean, can she expand? Does she have a potential to appeal to the economic insecurity and the economic discontent that is part of... Go ahead.
Well, she certainly has tried. I think that from the start of her campaign, she's talked about a principal focus will be to raise wages for all Americans. Wage stagnation is an important issue. It's created some of the economic that we see in a lot of parts of the country. She has talked about an economy that works for everybody, but she has not galvanized that issue, and she certainly has not galvanized that constituency. A lot of that constituency, the white working class constituency, is Donald Trump. So she has the ability, but if you look at the last few elections, the Obama coalition, to the degree that she can reassemble that, is a coalition that gets you over 50% and gets you over 270 electoral votes. So she has an easier way both to get to 50% in a head-to-head race, or to get to 270 electoral votes. His path is very, very difficult. And so one of the problems he has right now is, if you look at the polling both nationally, our most recent poll, and in a number of the battleground state polls that have come out, her percentage among Democrats is about what she needs, which is 90 or 92 or 93%. His percentage among Republicans is not close to that. It's in some cases the high 70s to the low 80s. He needs to bring that Republican support up to 90% in order to truly be competitive. If you see that number moving up, and not just creeping up, but moving up fairly directly, over the next few weeks, then this race will look much more competitive. But until that begins to happen, she'll have the advantage.
Hugh, do you think Donald Trump has Ronald Reagan's charm?
He does not have his charm. He does have even more training in the art of television. And I believe there's a good chance that Secretary Clinton will not debate because her lead is so substantial that whatever knock she'd get for refusing to do so is not equal to the risk of Donald Trump using his very well-documented TV chops. And we saw him in the debates do this time and time again via attacks on moderators, via attacks on candidates, speaking directly to camera. I don't see the upside for her in debating him, so we'll have to wait and see. But Reagan used those opportunities. I think Donald Trump will as well.
Can you imagine that she could get away with that, Dan?
I don't think she wants to get away with that. Exactly. I'll be surprised. I mean, they've already put out a statement. John Podesta, the chairman of the campaign, put out a statement last week saying they will accept the terms of the debates commission. They will be at the 3 debates that are already set in terms of the dates, and that they will abide by the formats that have already been set. Donald Trump has not yet done that in an explicit way. There's been indications that he'll participate in 3 debates, but he has not explicitly said he will show up on the 3 dates that are on the calendar at this point, or that he will accept the terms under which these debates are held by the commission. So the gap at this point is on Trump's side. He believes he won all the primary season debates. He believes that he's an effective debater. So and he dominated those stages, as you both recall, when there were a number of people on the stage with him. A head-to-head debate with Hillary Clinton will be different, but he's demonstrated an ability in live television performances that he knows how to handle himself. So I would think it would be in his interest to want to be on that stage for all of those debates.
My guess is that he knows that, and everything he says or they are saying is simply negotiation.
That may be.
I agree with that.
Well, may be the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
So people close to him have said to me, Hugh, that the problem with Donald Trump, or one of the problems, people are close to him, is that everything is a transaction and everything is. This has become part of the conventional wisdom. He sees everything as a negotiation, and whatever he says goes back to how he spent his life, which is basically starting at one place, hoping he'll end up somewhere else.
Yeah, I think when we look back, and Dan writes his book about this campaign, he is the developer. And he has always been a developer. And in my legal career, I've always represented large land developers. And everything is a negotiation. And every rule is permeable. And every no can be changed to a yes. And every density that you're given can be upped. And every acre that's been taken away can be recaptured. And so everything that Donald Trump does is based upon a lifetime of success and development. And so I do believe he's approaching these debates this way, trying to get a larger audience, trying to get it off of opposite the NFL, trying to remove what I think is a rather dead hand of the Presidential Commission on this, because it is boring and staid, and they ought to get rid of that town hall format to begin with. But there is an element of negotiation. If any change at all is made, I still think Secretary Clinton can pull a Richard Nixon from 1972 and walk off and wave goodbye to these debates, because there's no upside for her in these debates. None.
USA Today poll says that young voters are fleeing Donald Trump in what the paper said may be a historic trouncing. The survey shows Clinton trouncing Trump 56-20 among those under 35. We felt during the Democratic primary battle with Bernie Sanders that she had no appeal to the young voters. Now, when they are compared to Donald Trump, she does. Hugh?
Well, my theory of that, I'll turn to Dan. Millennials don't like mean people. If I can sum it up, they don't. They don't like. Bernie Sanders was perceived. It's not an age thing. Yeah. It's they don't like mean people. And Donald Trump has been perceived as being mean, and millennials flee from that. And I think that's the long and the short of it. I don't know if Dan agrees with that.
Dan?
I do. We did a long piece that Phil Rucker anchored over the weekend, and there were a number of us who were out around the country last week talking to young voters. We found 2 things. One is that they're not wild about this choice. They don't find either of these candidates particularly inspiring. On the other hand, they find Donald Trump a lot scarier and a lot less appealing than they find Hillary Clinton. And so I think that our reporting bears out the polling, which is that they are going to go in in big numbers for Hillary Clinton. I think the issue for her, as it has been all along, is whether she can generate the kind of enthusiasm that brings out the big turnout that Barack Obama was able to do. But in terms of percentages, she'll do handsomely with that with that group of voters.
When I talk to people in the Clinton campaign, I ask them what do they worry about most, and they say turnout.
I think that's right. I think that's the issue. I mean, we know that she's not been an inspiring candidate. I mean, Bernie Sanders did as well as he did during the primaries, in part because he was able to inspire people. He had an authenticity about his message, and she struggled with that. He had a clarity of his message, as does Donald Trump when he's on message, that she has lacked. It is very hard when she gives a speech on a subject to boil that down into something simple and say, here's what the Clinton campaign is about, other than kind of competence and incremental progress based on where we are today versus where we were and where people want to go. So the issue for her is inspiring people. Now, you know, for a lot of Democrats, Donald Trump is a figure who inspires them to want to get out and vote against him and to vote for her. But in so much of the polling that we've looked at this year, on both sides, there are as many or more people voting because they are voting against the opponent rather than because they are enthusiastically voting for the nominee of their party. And that is an issue for her, whether it's with young voters or Latinos or African Americans. She's got to make sure that the energy is there.
Hugh, do you accept that both of them are the least popular candidates ever to run for the presidency?
Oh, I do. The voter misery index, which I borrowed from Ronald Reagan and changed a little bit, adds the negatives of the two candidates, and they are running away with the voter misery index the way the Ledecky ran away with every one of her heats in the Olympics. They are the least liked, Batman and Robin of American politics ever.
See, I was waiting for you to either connect this to literature or to film, and you've connected it to the Olympics.
To sports.
What's your take on Trump and Putin? Hugh?
I believe that Vladimir Putin is so far ahead of most Americans of both parties when it comes to playing the grand game, the great game. I remember interviewing Vice President Cheney not once but twice and asking him about Putin. He said, when I looked in his eyes, I saw a KGB colonel. And so the KGB colonel has got Russian doll within Russian doll within Russian doll. And if people think he wants Trump to win, he probably wants Hillary to win. And if people think he wants Hillary to win, he probably wants Trump to win. And most of all, he's playing on a European chess game, and he's winning everywhere. He's winning in Crimea. He is winning in Moldova. He is winning in Estonia, leading pressure on the Baltic republics. Putin is winning. And what he wants to do to American politics is interfere and meddle. And we ought to be concerned about that. I just don't know that we know what his game plan is, and I would be the last person to presume to say I have any idea what this KGB expert is up to.
And well, you know what Bob Gates said? Bob Gates said he saw a stone-cold killer when he looked into his eyes. Dan, what's your take on Paul Manafort in today's New York Times story?
Well, it's a damaging story, though to be fair to him, he has denied it. He said, I've never taken any cash. I've never taken off-the-books payments. I never worked for either the government of Ukraine or the government of Russia. But, you know, we know he operated there. We know the history of that. We know, as Hugh said, that American consultants are in a lot of places overseas, and the question is on which side are you operating and for what kind of candidate are you operating? I think this is one of these issues that will continue to kind of be out there surrounding him, and particularly because of the way Donald Trump seemingly has related to Vladimir Putin. Putin said nice things about him, and Trump's MO is that if people say nice things about him, he says nice things about them. So it has created an aura that there is a coziness there, particularly between Trump and Putin. I take Hugh's point. I have no idea what Putin's real game is, and wouldn't pretend to suggest that I do. But Trump and now Manafort have gotten themselves wrapped up into a situation in which they have to explain or deny or try to put this to rest. It's pretty hard when these kinds of stories keep coming out.
You know, Charlie, there was an old Roman ruler named Sulla. He was Julius Caesar before Caesar, and I've said this on air before. On his tomb is the saying, "No friend has done me a favor nor enemy in injury that I have not repaid in full. And what Dan just referred to, Trump reacts very much that way, the Sula reflex. If you say nice things about him, he likes you. I brought up Mary Catherine Ham to him last week as a potential debate moderator since she did so well in the in one of the debates. And he said, oh, no, she doesn't say nice things about me. She's off the list. Mary Catherine's a conservative. I don't think Hillary Clinton would be accepting Mary Catherine Ham, but I was surprised to learn Donald Trump. But that is his M.O. It's very personal. Politics is very personal with him.
And then there's the income tax returns.
Well, look, I asked him in February of 2015, would you release them? And he said he would. And I talked to him about the number of years in which he would release them. And he said he'd go back. What's the norm? 1, 2, 3. And we talked as though it was a fait accompli. I do not believe in February of 15 he thought he would be looking at September of 16 and with the expectation that he would actually have to release them. He's not going to release them. That's not happening. And you know what? It probably doesn't matter to 99.9% of the American public. What matters to them is, our friend Matt Dowd has said often, and I'm sure Dan has heard him say this, who understands me better? The American voter goes in and says, who gets me? Who knows where I am? Who cares about me? And in this election, they're looking at both of these candidates and they're saying, I don't think either of them give a rat's patootie for my life right now. And that's the problem.
Dan, will he be forced to release him, or can he, as Hugh just suggested, in the end, voters ask who? I think it's more than cares about me, understands me. In my words.
Well, on the tax returns, Charlie, I think he's made a calculation that
exactly.
Hugh is correct, that he does not have to release him and that most people won't care. I think the issue is what is there that he doesn't want to release? But the second is, what does that tell us about what kind of presidency he would operate? Would he operate under the norms we expect of a president in terms of transparency, or would he not? And I think that's a question that goes beyond the issue of the tax returns.
You agree with that, Hugh? I mean, he obviously has something to hide, does he not? And what is your speculation as to what he might have to hide in those tax returns? Is it some relationship with somebody, or is it how much money he reported, or how many charitable deductions he took, or something like that?
I hesitate to speculate only because I've always been underwhelmed by everyone's tax returns. Mitt Romney was reluctant to release them, and it came out he made a lot of money, and some of it was in an offshore account in the Grand Cayman, and that was not a big issue. So I have no idea what some people perceive as being their vulnerability, whether they pay too little, they pay too much, they don't give enough to charity, they give too much, they have associations which are unsavory, or people don't understand. I've never figured it out. I will say this, I don't think it really does matter. I think Donald Trump is in control of his own ability to close the gap and develop some momentum. It won't be the tax returns. It'll be his ability to sit down with people like you, Charlie, people like me, people like Dan, and communicate warmth and caring. Not just the oligarch, not just the man of power, but FDR was all that, but he also had a bedside manner, if you will, a radio side manner that was charming and engaging, as was Ronald Reagan. I've seen that in Donald Trump. I've actually seen him do that, and I've talked to him when he's done that. And if he can flip on that switch, goes to the I'm going to keep these reporters out of my rally switch, I think he does much better when he's happy.
On that, thank you so much, Hugh Hewitt. Thank you much, Dan Balz. It's a pleasure.
Thanks,
always.
Charlie.
Always.
Thank you, Charlie.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.